For this week's field test, we've come to a nature reserve in Montana, near the famous Yellowstone National Park, with the Nikon D500. We're going to be spending 2 days in the company of Ronan Donovan.
We got some ravens here, there's 2 of them perched. They're onto us.
A biologist and nature photographer, Ronan has worked in this park before, and we're hoping that he'll know where we can find the bird and animal species that make it such a rich photographic environment.
My name is Ronan Donovan, and I'm a visual storyteller that works for National Geographic magazine. There's a real marriage between photography and science for me. The idea of storytelling and conservation, the 2 things are really important in the work that I do. I did 2 summers around the state of Montana, conducting surveys for basically everything that you don't hunt. So amphibians, reptiles, small mammals, bats, birds. I started out as a wildlife biologist. I did field biology for about 10 years. And when I wasn't conducting surveys for the state, I was out playing with my camera and practicing. You know, it's about knowing your subject. I think that the most successful wildlife photographers that I looked up to are some that also were wildlife biologists in the beginning, and then they transitioned into photography. I didn't know about making a career of this. I had no plans of that. And over the course of 10 years, it progressed into that for me. It's one of those lessons where you make your passion your work. I'm still just a crappy businessman. So this valley is unique in that it's kind of nestled in between these 2 mountain ranges, one to the north and one to the south. And they're big ranges that they hold wolves and elk and grizzlies and the big megafauna that we still have in North America. We're in a really unique area. We're within the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem at a wildlife refuge. It's a big grassland complex, sagebrush with some streams and creeks running through that are lined with willows, so it's a good place for moose that'll browse. And it's a photographer's paradise in many ways. Perfect area for nesting because everything can just tuck up into these little reed islands.
This is an arid area.
What I need in the camera for wildlife photography, it's got to have really fast autofocus. It's got to have, durability in the body, weather sealing, and it's got to have a high frame rate.
The 20 megapixel D500 is Nikon's most professionally oriented APS-C DSLR yet. Capable of shooting at up to 10 frames per second, the D500 is fast, tough, and highly advanced, making it a perfect companion for virtually any kind of photography. At the heart of the D500 is a 20 megapixel APS-C sensor, giving an effective focal length increase of 1.5 times. If the 1.5 times focal length increase doesn't get you quite close enough, 20 megapixels is easily enough resolution to allow for cropping. We're only using full-frame lenses on this shoot, because we'll need that extra reach to capture birds and other small animals from a distance. With a fast XQD card installed, at 10 frames per second, the D500's burst depth is incredible, even in RAW mode. I didn't bring the manual, did you?
Oh, I thought you were the manual. Yesterday we were driving around, and the first bird we came upon was a kestrel. There's a kestrel right here on this fence. Yep. American kestrel, a male who's got something in his talons. And it looked like it had like a big cricket, big Mormon cricket, really fat-bodied. Was having trouble flying with it because it's a pretty good-sized animal. It's a challenging bird to photograph. They're our smallest falcon that we have in North America, and incredibly agile, quick-moving in the air.
One of the most impressive technologies that the D500 brings to action and wildlife photography is its autofocus system. In 3D AF tracking mode, all 153 of the D500's autofocus points work with the camera's 180,000 pixel metering sensor to identify and track a subject as it moves around the frame.
Another bird we saw was Swainson's hawk, and the Swainsons ended up taking off and doing a really nice arc, flying right overhead. Got some really nice, frame-filling shots of the Swainsons.
Capturing a sharp photo of a bird flying against a blue sky is easy for most DSLR AF systems, but a low-level flyby against a cluttered, similarly coloured background is a different matter altogether.
One of the main things that impressed me about it was the giant swath of autofocus points. Essentially, your whole viewfinder is an autofocus point that's picking up where this bird is.
The array of autofocus points covers virtually the full imaging area of the D500 sensor, which is very handy when trying to keep a fast-moving subject framed correctly. The D500's autofocus response can be customized according to how erratically the subject is moving and how likely it is for other objects to get between it and the camera. At the equivalent of 750mm, even at a relatively small aperture, depth of field is tiny. These hawks can dive at close to 100 miles per hour, but the majority of shots in this sequence are in focus.
This touchscreen's cool.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
The D500 features a tilting, touch-sensitive rear screen. The touchscreen is perhaps most useful when it comes to quickly flipping through and zooming into images in review mode. I think the biggest issue is that I need an ND filter, and the only one we have is on your camera right now, filming me. But anyway, let's see what we have.
Want it?
Sorry?
Want it?
Do you mind? Do you not need it?
I mean, for the shot, you can do it.
The D500 offers a solid video feature set, including 1080 60p movie recording and 4K. 4K footage can be captured at up to 30p, but in this mode the field of view is cropped by a further 1.5 times, which adds up to a total crop factor of 2.25 times.
I'm enjoying here the grass, which is, just getting blown by the wind a lot, so going down to a really slow shutter speed, a 20th of a second, and trying to get a little bit of motion here.
We had a really nice situation yesterday evening. Sun had already set, we're heading back, and we came upon this lake that had 2 trumpeter swans on it. 100 years ago, they were thought to have been extinct. They were, a big bird for market hunters, and they were hunted out, and there was only a couple places left in the United States where these birds were found. So it's really low light at this time. We're shooting at, 3200 ISO. My shutter speed was 1/8 of a second, so I'm shooting basically panned action, waiting for some movement. And they were kind of going through these pair bonding rituals where they, come up to each other, bob their heads up and down, and then they did a couple successive flights.
While Ronan focused on capturing movement with his panning shots, I wanted to see how the D500 performed when trying to track the trumpeter swan's landing. Even at an incredible ISO 258,000, a lot of detail and colour can be drawn out of the raw files. On our way back to camp, Ronan got this quick grab shot of a short-eared owl using just the lights of our truck.
We're camped next to this picturesque lake. It's full of waterfowl. And so we get up an hour before sunrise, walk down along the lake, and just had this, pretty idyllic scene where sun rising to the east, there's a long stream cloud that's getting lit up, started out, kind of this salmon pink color, and then orange, and all the while there's ducks and geese flying back and forth, a pair of swans flew by, northern harrier flew over. Really just one of those spectacular moments where you, as a photographer, just as a human, you just get really excited and energized by seeing those things. Starting off your day in that way is one of the things I really like about this job. My goal with the photography and the stories that I produce is to get invested in it, not just take what is given to you, it's to ask questions. Inherently, people are losing touch with the environment and losing touch with the idea of conservation. And I think that the ability to see those places is, the first step of getting people invested in them. Public land to me is a really important aspect of North America, and we're incredibly lucky in having the amount of public land that we do. Half the United States is public land, and that's a big deal. The more people experience public lands and wild places, then they're going to be connected to it, and they're going to want to have a voice in how it's used in the future. When photography is done right, that is the goal.
Shooting wildlife is full of challenges, from the erratic movement of a hawk in flight to capturing an owl way after dark. Fortunately, Ronan knows this area and its fauna so well that we were able to plan our shooting locations and take full advantage of the D500's 1.5 times crop to get in close without disturbing the animals that we found. But even when we weren't shooting bursts of frames at long focal lengths, the D500 proved an ideal companion for this trip, and both Ronan and I came away with some great shots. For DP Review, I'm Barney Britton. Thanks for watching.
The Nikon D3500 is fun to use and simple to operate. Its 24.2 megapixel format allows you to capture high-quality images effortlessly. A light and balanced body lets you take it with you wherever you go. Continuous shooting of 5 frames per second, in combination with its 11-point focusing system, the D3500 captures moving images with ease. The Bluetooth connectivity lets you use your smart device as a remote trigger to capture the images, and then automatically transfers those images from the camera to your phone. The ISO range of up to 25,600 captures beautiful images throughout the day. Record 1080p high-definition video by activating the live view mode and pressing the record button. Capture your best moments with the Nikon D3500.
Here's what you need to know to get started with the Nikon D5600. The D5600 is usually packaged with an 18 to 55mm f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens. For greater versatility, the 18 to 140mm f3.5 to 5.6 offers a wider zoom range. If you're just going to buy one additional lens for your D5600, we'd recommend the 35mm f1.8. It's small, sharp, and great for shooting in low light. To get started, we recommend a UHS 1 type Class 3 memory card with at least 64GB of storage. We also recommend adding an extra battery to your kit. If you're a beginner, the green auto mode will take care of the shooting settings, letting you focus on composition. But to get the most out of the D5600's 24-megapixel sensor, we recommend shooting in RAW mode and adjusting the images using Nikon's bundled Capture NXD software. For more advanced photographers, the PASM exposure modes will let you take full control over the D5600, including its versatile 39-point autofocus system. Switch to autofocus C if you want to shoot moving subjects. If you'd rather position your focus point manually, you can do this by moving your finger around the touchscreen, either in live view or with your eye to the viewfinder. The Effects mode allows you to apply 10 different filters to stills and video. The D5600 shoots HD video at up to 60p. Use the flip-out screen to compose video footage and set the focus. Use SnapBridge to wirelessly connect the camera to your mobile device for photo sharing. For more in-depth information about the Nikon D5600, including a deep dive into all of its key features, head to dpreview.com.
In today's real-world camera review, we're taking Nikon's D750 Enthusiast full-frame DSLR to the Museum of Flight in Seattle.
And that's the first Boeing swept-wing multi-jet aircraft that led directly to the creation of the 707, which was the first Boeing jet airliner.
As well as being one of my favourite places in the city, the museum also happens to have a wide variety of shooting situations all in one location. Low light, bright sunlit halls, and a working airfield right on the doorstep. With me is Rishi Sanyal, my co-worker at DP Review and one of the biggest camera nerds the world has ever known.
So Rishi, you're at the Museum of Flight today in Seattle. We've got the Nikon D750. What are we going to check out?
Well, what's really great about it is its image sensor is great, so it gives you really good image quality in a variety of situations, and it's got a lot of features that actually make it an option for pros. It's borrowing the AF system from the D4S, the D810, so it has the advanced tracking capabilities and autofocus performance of those cameras, and it's also really lightweight. And so if you're a professional holding a camera all day, a wedding shooter, you will appreciate the lightweight feel, but the professional features of the camera.
So we've got several situations set up here. We've got some low light galleries, we've got some bright light galleries. We might go outside later on. Great, I think we've also got an off-camera flash setup we want to do as well with it to show the off-camera flash triggering and see what the camera can do.
And the other thing is, we all know, Barney, you're a little bit of a plane nerd here, so I think we should have fun here.
Yeah, that's true, that's true. I do love planes and cameras. So if we can get bacon-wrapped shrimp into this somehow, then I'll be completely happy.
The Nikon D750 is a 24 megapixel full-frame DSLR aimed at enthusiasts and semi-professional photographers. The D750 borrows a lot of its core features from Nikon's professional D810 and D4S. That includes a 51-point AF system with 3D tracking and a 1080 60p movie mode. A tilting rear LCD screen also makes the D750 more versatile when it comes to shooting from high or low angles, and of course for video.
So we're in one of the two personal courage wings here at the Museum of Flight. This is the World War I gallery here right now. So what are we going to do with the camera?
Well, it's pretty dim in here, so it's a good place to test out the high ISO capabilities of this camera. We're at ISO 16,000 right now at f8, and it's still holding up pretty well.
The light inside the museum's personal courage galleries is very low, but even here, the D750's AF system is not struggling to lock on. Rated down to -3 EV, the D750's AF is actually better in poor light than the D810 and D4S. This is a major selling point for anyone who routinely shoots in dim conditions. In common with other high-end Nikon DSLRs, the D750 allows one-click image magnification in playback mode using the OK button on the camera's rear. The RGB histogram display is also very handy and tells Rishi whether any of the 3 color channels are clipped. Usefully, this feature is also available when the image is magnified, allowing you to check channel clipping across any area of a photograph. After getting a few shots of the Sopwith pup hanging from the ceiling, Rishi wanted to include me in the composition, which meant selecting a small enough aperture to keep me and the airplane in the background sharp. This pushed the D750's ISO sensitivity right up to ISO 51200, and using off-center AF points is a real test of the system's ability to focus.
What you can see here is that we're using the off-center AF points, including that one right there, to basically focus on Barney's eye. Even the off-center ones, they all focus down to UV -3. They hold up pretty well. So this is a downed plane,
It is a downed German aircraft, yes, they lost in the end. It's very low light, and what we're going to do is we're going to put some flashes around it to sort of fill in the light and give it a nice sort of quite dynamic, hopefully, but not entirely uniform light. We're going to use off-camera flashes. We're going to trigger them wirelessly from the camera.
We're zooming the heads all the way in to 200 millimeters.
What sort of ISO are you at here, Rishi?
3200.
Okay.
Okay, now we're getting a little better balanced lighting.
All right. The ability to wirelessly trigger multiple strobes using the D750's built-in flash is a real strength of this camera. Here, we're not only shaping the light using 3 off-camera flashes, but colouring it too, using gel filters. With the built-in flash acting as a trigger, Rishi can place our off-camera flashes into manual or automatic metering modes as he pleases. What we're doing here is fairly extreme. but it demonstrates the versatility of Nikon's creative lighting system.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, is that working?
Yeah, we got all sorts of colors going off. We're finally challenging the AF.
With our flash test complete, we moved into the museum's main gallery, which consists of many airplanes displayed on the floor of the hall and suspended from the ceiling. On this bright sunny morning, there's a risk that shooting upwards at the planes hanging from the roof will result in severe underexposure and silhouetting. We are hoping that this will be a really good test of the D750's metering system and the dynamic range of the sensor.
What this camera has is a new metering mode called highlight weighted metering, and that will help us because it'll weight the exposure so as to not blow out the bright highlights behind the airplanes.
So how are we going to get the shadows up if we do that?
So there are two ways to deal with that. One is put ADL on as high as it can go, extra high, but the other really nice feature is flat profile mode. And
That's a video, they put it in, Nikon put it in this camera for videographers.
yes, I think videographers will be using it quite a bit to grade their footage, but it actually works out well for still photographers too, if you want a nice straight out of camera JPEG that looks good. And of course, the other option is to just shoot RAW.
Right.
And in RAW, you have a lot of processing latitude of those shadows and highlights.
as we know, these sensors can be pushed a lot.
They can be pushed a lot because there's very little noise in these sensors. And so what you can do is expose for the highlights and then don't even worry about the dark shadows on your camera. Take that RAW file, pull it into post-processing software, and then lift the shadows to
Great,
text.
we'll be doing that later on, but for now, let's just get the shot and see what we can get.
Yes,
All
let's
right.
try it.
Polished aluminium airplanes in direct sun are tricky subjects to shoot. But we know that the D750 sensor has a huge amount of dynamic range. That should allow us to capture everything from deep shadows to bright highlights in a single shot, without resorting to image compositing.
I think we've got a lot of examples here of really, really tough scenes, really high dynamic range scenes, backlit subjects. We couldn't have asked for a brighter sun. There's a huge difference between the brightness of the sun, brightness of the outside of the museum, and the inside, and I'm shooting straight into the air intakes of these two Korean War era jets. So I know if I underexpose these RAW files a lot, what I can do is I can get the sun and the bright areas properly exposed in the camera, but then the shadow areas are totally black. I mean, the exposure it looks horrendous, but what I know with the RAW files in this camera, the sensor that's in this camera, I can actually pull a huge amount of detail out of the shadows, way more than you might think.
I love spending time in the Museum of Flight, and today everything has come together. I get to hang out around planes, and with the dark galleries and bright main hall creating really tough shooting environments, we're really stretching the Nikon D750's sensor too.
So Rishi, I can't help noticing you're on the roof of a car. what are we doing here?
Well, we've got an airfield here and a landing strip and a takeoff strip. And so what we figured we'd do is pop a 70-200 f4 image stabilized lens on the D750 and change it into autofocus continuous mode with 3D tracking. And that way I set my center focus point on whatever it is I want to focus. I initiate focus, and then I let the camera take over and pick the correct AF point to stay on the subject and track. And we got one coming in right now.
Coming in.
Cool. Stayed on the plane.
This is a Boeing 737-900ER. I think it's brand new. It's very loud. It's so shiny and new. That's the Dreamliner 7879. That's the new version of the Dreamliner. It's still undergoing flight testing, I think. Oh, that's very special.
Do you have like a favorite plane? It's something that
I do have a favorite plane, and it's right here. It's the 747. It's the first ever jumbo jet. And the reason we're here today is I've worked with the museum on the restoration of this plane. It's parked right up there. It's just the most amazing thing to see. It's huge.
Where did you develop this? I'm gonna call it a fetish, man, because that's what it is.
My airplane fetish?
Yes.
I was raised, there's an airfield near me, and there were planes coming over all the time. And I know when I used to go walking in the Dales, which is like the hills around where I'm from in the countryside, there were lots of really fast-moving military jets used to come through there, and even when I was really young, I was fascinated by them. But I don't know, I just think it's magical that things as big as that Dreamliner that we saw can like go from on the ground, not moving at all, to being 7 miles up. Okay, Rishi, I'm happy because I spent a day geeking out over airplanes.
Yeah, you're a plane nerd.
What did we get from the D750 today?
No, it's a great camera. It's lightweight. It's got professional grade AF features, which are very, very useful for lots of different scenarios. And it's got an amazing sensor in there. It's just great in low light as well as in lots of high dynamic range situations. The buffer did fill up quite easily when I was shooting in raw plus JPEG. So that's
shooting at 6 FPS.
Yeah, 6.5 FPS continuous shooting. You are going to fill up that buffer, but I really do appreciate the 6.5 FPS fast shooting rate, which puts it between the D810 and the D4S. The only other thing I would appreciate is cross-type points all over the frame.
You know, you had some issues in low light with the very peripheral AF points not being quite as...
Yeah, because in really low light, it's really trying to find contrast, and when you have cross-type points, it just has a better chance of finding contrast and detail in your scene because it's looking along two axes for detail.
Well, I know we've got some raw files shot inside the museum in that main gallery, which was severely underexposed, 2-3 stops underexposed, and I'm really curious to see what we can pull out of those shadows.
Yeah, you can go 5-6 stops, you'll be surprised.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's see what we get. Rishi, we spent a really fun morning at Museum of Flight.
Yeah, you got to look at planes.
I got to look at lots of planes.
I got to play with the camera. It's
So
great.
we were both happy. This is the first shot you took, I think, when we turned up.
Yeah, and this was taken at a pretty high ISOs, 10,000. Of course, we're not really stressing the system because nothing's moving, but it performed admirably. And
f7.1 for sharpness, you know, handheld at ISO 10,000. I'd be happy with that.
yeah, me too.
What do you want to do for this shot? Just talk me
So here
through
I wanted to get both you and the airplane in focus. So I stopped down to f8 here, and I went to about 1/30th of a second shutter speed because I felt comfortable hand-holding that. And so the ISO here just hiked up to 51,200.
All right, so after we shot the aircraft hanging from the ceiling, you got the picture of me, we moved on and we found I think the lowest light situation in the entire museum, which is this setup diorama here they have of a crashed aircraft.
This was really, really dark. And I was focusing over here, and this was stressing the AF system quite a bit.
Well, this is the only situation we actually had when we did manage to stress the AF system, wasn't it? The light was just on the cusp of being too low.
Yeah, I could barely see this detail here, and the camera, you know, it was able to focus. It maybe hunted once or twice, but it was able to lock focus. Nikon has a very good CLS, creative lighting system, so you can trigger off-camera flashes using the on-camera flash right here. So we had 3 strobes, and we figured just for fun we'd add a little blue light here, some red light here, simulate like a fire, and a little spotlight here on the wing.
We're still hand-holding, there's no tripod, we're still shooting at ISO, I think 3200 for this. But the shot without any of the flashes on at all, we're at ISO 12,800 upwards just to get an image.
Yeah, and what's great about this is right in camera you can control the different flash groups, just assign different flashes to different flash groups and then give them different exposure compensations, used through the lens metering, so the flashes actually are using the camera's metering. Great thing was it just, you know, it took me 5-10 minutes to learn it because it's so simple.
Yeah.
You don't need any external attachments and, you know, screwing on attachment to every single one of your flashes and your camera and everything. It just works out of the box because of the optical trigger. And the menu system for the flash is really nice too, because you can control different groups and assign different exposures to the different flashes, manual through the lens, everything.
All right, so after we did the flash shot in the really low light areas of the museum, we moved into the big gallery, the main gallery. It's a glass ceiling space, it's huge, there's planes hanging from the ceiling, there's planes everywhere, it's fantastic, I love planes. The issue you have working in this kind of situation is there's no uplighting on these aircraft, they're basically hanging from the ceiling.
I wanted some of the color in the sky. I'm a big fan of sunbursts, so I wanted a little bit of a sunburst there without that thing blowing to white, and so I just turned the camera into highlight metering mode, which is something new that Nikon's offering on the D810 and the D750, which basically uses its metering system, which pretty much covers the entire scene in relatively high resolution, so it can meter the scene and figure out what exposure it needs to save the highlights, and that's why it's called highlight weighted metering. The problem with this is that stuff in shadows just goes completely dark, right?
You can't use
what you
this.
see here, right? So what you can do then is use Nikon's ADL or active D-lighting modes in conjunction with this highlight weighted metering to bring the shadows back up. And so this is ADL extra high, which brings the shadows up, but it wasn't quite enough. And so at that point, you can actually enable a new picture profile mode that Nikon offers known as flat.
Yeah, let's talk about this because this mode, and we maybe made this mistake initially in our coverage of the 810 and 750 as well. We sort of thought that was a videographer's feature.
That's what it's marketed as in general, but I actually love using it as a stills photographer because there are lots of scenes that are very high dynamic range, and in those cases, the high contrast image that your camera will typically make in standard mode does not actually correlate to what our eyes see in the real world, which is just this high dynamic range scene. And so what the flat picture profile does at that point in those situations is it actually brings you closer to what your eye would have seen. Literally very little to no noise. And the sensor means that you can rescue really, really deep tones. And here you've even added some contrast back to the scene to counteract what the flat profile might have otherwise done.
I mean, this is how I know a lot of people are JPEG shooters. It's convenient, it's much easier to do that. But if you do shoot RAW with these cameras, you can do quite extraordinary things to the files.
Yeah, the RAW file has all the data you need. You know, you can use highlight weighted metering to preserve the highlights, but all the shadow detail here is in the RAW file, and it's clean because there's so much dynamic range on this camera.
This was ambitious. I think this was 4 stops underexposed, maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And there's nothing there at all.
Right.
There's the sun, but nothing else.
Yeah.
And then in RAW, there you go.
You
There's
get all
the
that
shot.
back.
And there's a little bit noisy if you zoom in, but
it's perfectly acceptable.
it's a picture, and that is not a picture. And this shot has detail in everything from deep shadows right through to the highlights of the sun. A slightly less extreme example here, exposing for the highlights again on the fuselage of this aircraft. And there you go. And that's 2 minutes work.
Right, and the important thing here is you don't even have to bracket. There are no graduated filters here, there's no HDR, there's no bracketing. The dynamic range of the sensor is so much that you can actually capture a ridiculous amount of tones in the real world.
This is worth stressing. You're really not losing anything by doing that. There is so much detail in these shadows.
I've been trying to find scenes in the real world where, you know, I actually go beyond the dynamic range capabilities of these sensors, and I've been shooting, you know, crazy sunsets where the clouds light up bright red half an hour after sunset and your foreground is dim, and I can't stress the camera. This is an incredibly high dynamic range shot where I exposed to save the tones in the sky. You see this really nice gradient from orange to blue, and everything here is really, really dark. And if you just go to...
Let me turn ADL on.
Extra high, you get some of that back. Then when you go to the flat picture profile, you get even more back. And if you actually start looking here, the detail on the rocks are all actually there.
And this is just JPEG, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't even... If you go to the RAW, there's even more detail there.
Okay, so after we shot the dynamic range stuff inside in the main gallery, we went outside a little bit later in the morning, and we wanted to test the tracking capabilities of the camera because we weren't really stressing that aspect of it inside. We were shooting a maximum frame rate here of 6.5 frames a second. This is the AF point superimposed, and it's pretty much dead on. I mean, even when it momentarily wanders off, I think in a couple of frames time, but the plane doesn't go out of focus.
Exactly, and this is coming from Nikon's most professional level cameras. The D4, D4S, the D800, D810 have all got this 51-point AF system with this high resolution metering sensor that can analyze a scene and stick to your subject. And they put it in this tiny body at this price point. It's a very compelling system, especially
it's a real differentiator, I think. So Rishi, let's talk really quickly about video. I mean, when we were doing a lot of our still shooting, the crew was shooting with a second D750 and doing a lot of B-roll around the museum and shooting lots of video footage.
Yeah, and our director got some great shots.
Yeah, this is one of them. This is just a rolling sort of dolly shot just along the floor of the museum. This is ISO 1000, flat picture profile for the full dynamic range.
Yeah, so you can grade it later and get all that dynamic range.
So this might look a little bit flat, a little bit contrastless, but that's the point.
Right, exactly. It just gives you latitude and grading afterwards.
Yeah, but certainly the film crew's take on this camera is it's up there with the best of the DSLRs in terms of its
right, because it's got the advantage of having a full frame sensor and the noise performance it brings, and then the flat picture profile allows you to get a lot of the dynamic range into that video footage, and so it's
nice
very
clean
versatile.
blacks as well. There's almost no noise in the shadows down here.
Exactly.
All right, so we've looked at all the pictures. We ran through a lot of shooting scenarios this morning: low light, bright light, high dynamic range stuff, AF tracking. What's your sort of general feeling about the 750?
Well, it's amazing what they packed into this guy. It's got an industry-leading sensor that has incredible raw dynamic range. The ISO performance is great. The incredible ability to pull shadows and shoot for highlights with the highlight weighted metering. The AF tracking is fantastic.
We should stress something here is that we're talking about this AF system, and this really is among the best that we've ever seen.
It's
better than anything else out there.
It really is. It's industry leading. Nikon has iterated the system for a very long time, and it's gotten to the point where you can trust it.
Yeah. I think we're both pretty impressed with the D750.
I think it's the amount of professional features and the industry-leading sensor and the small, lightweight body make it quite versatile for lots of different photographic scenarios, and makes it literally almost peerless.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Richard. This has been fun.
Thank you, Barney.